Hello, everybody, and welcome to Law at the Library, a partnership between the Chicago Bar Association, the Evanston Public Library, and the Chicago Public Library. My name is Lorena Neal. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the legal literacy librarian at the Evanston Public Library. We're delighted to have everyone here tonight for this presentation on property taxes in Cook County. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the format for the evening, and then we'll get started. I'll introduce our speaker, who will then give his presentation, followed by a question and answer period. If you have any questions for our speaker, please type them into the Q&A window, which you will find near the bottom of your screen. And you can also use the chat feature to ask your questions if you prefer. I will collect your questions as they come up and give our presenter the opportunity to answer them at the end of the presentation portion. So feel free to add your questions whenever you think of them. If you have any technical issues or questions, you can feel free to direct those to me in the chat as well. Our next Law at the Library session will be on February 19th, and the topic will be consumer law dealing with debt. I'll put the link to register for that program in the chat if you're interested. And in the meantime, you can always see videos of previous presentations from Law at the Library on the Evanston Public Library YouTube page. And I will post a link to our playlist of those presentations in the chat as well. We do also have a list of general free and low cost legal resources on the Evanston Public Library website, and I will put that in the chat in addition. Our speaker tonight is Justin Kervin, the Director of Policy at the Cook County Treasurer's Office, where he's worked for over 9 years. And we're thrilled to have you here tonight, Justin, and I will turn things over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm happy to speak to everybody about the property tax administration process in Cook County, Illinois. As you know, Cook County encompasses the city of Chicago and the suburbs. So let me just share my screen here, and hopefully now you should see a presentation. So the Cook County Treasurer is Maria Pappas. Many of you probably get 2 tax bills a year from her. The office sends out a first installment tax bill that's due in March, and a second installment tax bill typically due in August. Here's a map of Cook County. The city of Chicago proper is in white, and the suburbs are colored here. Cook County is actually the second largest property tax collection system in the U.S. by number of parcels that we collect on and dollar amount collected. Los Angeles is the biggest. You might expect New York to be up there, but it's divided into boroughs, so technically it doesn't count as one big county. But the others are Harris County in Houston and Maricopa County in Phoenix. And we do quite a bit of information exchange with those other counties that have especially large property tax collection processes. I want to spend some time here going over the property tax cycle. A lot of people, I think, don't understand the beginning to the end of the cycle in Cook County. And you might be missing opportunities to reduce your tax bill if you're not aware of all the steps in the process. So property tax begins with an assessment of the value of the property in Cook County. The assessor of Cook County is charged with determining the market value of every property in Cook County. So that's residential property, commercial and industrial property, even vacant lots. And the assessor does this in 3 triads. So every year, approximately 1/3 of the property in Cook County is reassessed, is revalued, it being too much to do it all at once. And so the assessor takes 1/3 of the property in Cook County and evaluates it and determines the market value of the the property, and will send out notices to all of the property owners in that triad saying, here's our estimate of market value for your property. Residential property is assessed at 10% of the market value of the property. So if a home's market value is estimated to be $200,000, the assessed value, the taxable value on that property is 10% of that, $20,000. And that's the portion of the market value that actually gets a tax rate applied to it and taxed. For commercial and industrial property, the assessment level is 25% of the market value of the property. So if commercial property is worth $1 million, $250,000 of it is assessed and taxed. So the assessor sends out these notices to the property in the triad that's being reassessed that year, and property owners have an opportunity to appeal that estimate of market value to the assessor. A lot of people don't take advantage of that. Homeowners, especially, in my view, should take advantage of that, because it never hurts to have the assessor check other properties in your area and make sure that you're being assessed fairly compared to those other properties in your area. They do make mistakes. The appraisal system is done by what's called a mass appraisal system. So essentially, it's a computer algorithm that's estimating the value of the properties in a neighborhood. And so it helps to give the assessor specific information about your property that the assessor can use to get a more accurate estimate of market value than perhaps the algorithm yielded when it ran a mass appraisal analysis. So if you appeal to the assessor, you'll get a response back. And if you're unhappy with the assessor's decision as to the market value of your property, you can then appeal to the Cook County Board of Review. Cook County Board of Review is comprised of 3 elected commissioners. Each of those commissioners has a staff. Appeals go to that Cook County Board of Review and are evaluated by staffs of all 3 commissioners. To get a change in value, 2 of the 3 commissioners have to agree on the change of value. In the news, you might have heard a lot of discussion about this Cook County Board of Review lowering the value of commercial properties from where the Cook County assessor set them. And that's created quite a kerfuffle between the assessor and the Board of Review. The assessor says the commercial property should be assessed at a certain level. The Board of Review has reduced those assessments, meaning those commercial properties get taxed less. And in exchange, as a result of that, the residential properties have to get taxed at a higher rate to make up the difference. And so if you think of the tax base, the total amount of assessable value in an area as a pie, what these assessment levels are doing is really determining how much tax each property has to bear. So if you reduce your neighbor's tax bill, your tax bill tends to go up to compensate for it. If a commercial property leaves your neighborhood and is no longer there to absorb some of the taxation that's required of that area, other properties are going to have to bear the burden that's been left by that commercial property that left the neighborhood. So a problem you have a lot in the south suburbs, especially, is you don't have a lot of commercial property there to absorb the taxation from the municipalities there. And so the residential property bears a disproportionately large burden of the taxation from the municipalities there. Areas like downtown Chicago, which have a relatively large commercial tax base to absorb a lot of the taxation from the city of Chicago, help to keep tax rates actually rather low in the city of Chicago, and you'll see those tax rates go up quite a bit in the south suburbs where there isn't a lot of commercial tax base to absorb the tax burden. At any rate, if you appeal to the Board of Review and you don't like your answer there, you can appeal to still another state agency, the Property Tax Appeal Board, not on this slide. Actually, it says there on the slide, Illinois Property Tax Appeal Board, or state courts. So for residential property owners, you're going to go to the Property Tax Appeal Board. You're not going to file an appeal in state court. It's too expensive, doesn't make sense. Big buildings downtown will sometimes file appeals in state court, but typically not residential property owners. Those appeals at those two levels, whether at the Property Tax Appeal Board or in the court, take several years to adjudicate. So in those cases, what you do is you have to pay your total tax bill up front, wait for a decision from those courts, and if they lower your taxes, then you'll get a refund from my office, the Cook County Treasurer's Office, ultimately. The Illinois Department of Revenue plays a role in determining your total tax bill. They determine what's called an equalization factor to bring property assessments uniform throughout Cook County and throughout the state. So if you look at your tax bill, you'll notice an equalization factor. It's usually about 3. So it'll be, for example, a home that's market value is $200,000. Its assessment is 10% of that, or $20,000. To determine your tax bill, you take that assessed value, the $20,000, multiply it by the equalization factor, which is typically 3 in Cook County, to get $60,000. And then you multiply that by whatever the tax rate is that's applied to your property, which is determined by the amount of the levies on your property from all the units of local government that tax your property. So if you look at the next bullet here of the local governments, these are taxing districts, we call them, that tax properties. They have the authority to levy tax on property. And they're municipalities, they're school districts, fire districts, library districts. They determine the amount of tax that they need collected for their operations. They send those levies in to the Cook County clerk, who then determines at what rate each property in that area needs to be taxed in order to yield the amount that the local taxing districts have levied. So if the local taxing districts levy a total of, say, $50 million, the clerk's office says, okay, I have to harvest $50 million worth of tax from the property in this municipality. How much, at what rate do I need to tax each property, that assessed value of each property, in order to yield that amount of levy? And that determines your tax rate, right? So your tax bill is then determined by your assessed value, which is a function, a percentage of your market value. So it's your assessed value multiplied by that equalization factor of approximately 3, multiplied by your tax rate, which is determined by the county clerk each year. And that's going to determine your total tax bill. Okay. From that total tax bill, you'll see if you're a property owner, a homeowner, you can get deductions for homeowner exemptions, like the homeowner exemption, the senior exemption, disabled exemption, disabled veteran, a whole host of exemptions that can help reduce your bill from the total bill that's initially calculated by the clerk's office. The clerk's office then sends the treasurer a file, and we print and mail the tax bills twice a year. We collect the payments from the taxpayers, we put them on deposit, and within 30 days, we have to distribute any taxes we've collected pursuant to state law. We have to distribute those taxes to the taxing districts that levied them. So we've got a whole distribution matrix set up with all the bank accounts for all of the taxing districts, and we fire that money off to the taxing districts on a rolling basis as we collect it throughout the tax cycle. So we're collecting first installment bill money, then we're collecting second installment bill money, then we roll into the first installment of the next year and distribute that. And so on a rolling basis, we're sort of always distributing some tax collections as it trickles in late to the taxing districts that levied for it. I'll go to the next slide. So in Cook County, just to give you an idea of the numbers we're talking about here, there are approximately 1.8 million parcels of land, of property. Each of them is identified by a property index number, which is on your tax bill. And basically all of the property tax admin offices use that property index number as a tag to pull up all the information available on the parcel of the taxable parcel. So you see in 2024, there's nearly 1.8 million of the taxable properties, and we collected over $18 billion of tax and distributed that to the various taxing districts. The city of Chicago, it was 8.3 billion of tax we collected, and in the suburbs, we collected about $10 billion. And this is typical. Here's a breakdown showing you the breakdown between residential, commercial, and vacant property in Cook County. So of the 1.8 million PINs, parcels of land, almost 1.6 of them are residential. So the vast majority of individual properties are residential properties in Cook County. Might seem obvious, but I'm pointing it out here, give you an idea of the breakdown, and approximately 116,000 of those parcels are commercial industrial. The remainder are vacant lots. And we have a relative handful of not-for-profit parcels that are taxed at 20% of their market value. So here's an example of a first installment property tax bill from the Treasurer's Office. We mail them in late January. They're due March 1st. That's pursuant to state law. And also pursuant to state law, that first installment bill is not really a reflection of the tax on your property for that year. It's just a reflection of the prior year's total tax amount on your property. And we take 55% of that, and that's your first installment bill the following year. So every year, the first installment bill is going to be exactly 55% of the total of your last year's tax bill. It's a blue bill, and we've got in the middle here the taxing districts that tax your property. So before, remember, I was talking about the taxing districts that levy a tax upon each property. Well, your individual tax bill lists your taxing districts. You can see here, right? And the Treasurer's Office passed an ordinance that requires each of the taxing districts in Cook County to report to us their pension and healthcare debts, their liabilities. And so we compile that information and we put on your tax bill, your first installment bill for each of these taxing districts, how much is the pension obligations of your taxing districts that tax you. So you can get an idea of how much in debt for pension and healthcare costs your taxing districts, your local taxing districts are. It's just sort of an informational courtesy that we provide on the first installment tax bill. Here's a little zoom in on that. Should be relatively self-explanatory. We put in very lay terms, these column headings, what the column means. Next, we see a second installment property tax bill. This is also called the final tax bill for the year because it reflects the total amount of tax that's due on the property for the year. By statute, they're due August 1st. although we did have several years where Cook County's bills went out late, not because the treasurer's office couldn't print them timely, but because we didn't get the information from the other agencies in time to get those bills out on time. But we, in the last year or so, have been back on the regular statutory cycle, and we expect the bills to keep coming out in late June with an August 1st due date this year and going forward. I should point out on this second installment bill, we show you which exemptions your property got. So you can see in here, it's listed the homeowner's exemption, the senior citizens exemption, and this property also has a senior freeze, which freezes the equalized assessed value of a property at a certain level for the year that you apply for it. So it keeps, the intention is to keep bills from rising on seniors who reside in a property as their principal residence and have income household income below $65,000 a year. Here's a zoom in on the middle portion of that second installment bill. This is showing you essentially based on the levy of each of these taxing districts, how much of your tax bill we distributed at the treasurer's office to each of those taxing districts that levied upon the property. So we distributed $974.83 to Thornton Township High School District 205 of the $2,695 we collected, and so on and so forth. So this will give you an idea of, where your money is going when you pay your taxes. It's not going to Cook County. Cook County is getting on this property only $30 out of the $2,695 on the bill, right? So Cook County collects it, but Cook County actually keeps approximately 6 to 7% of each tax bill. The rest of it goes to high school districts, libraries, municipalities, the South Cook Mosquito Abatement District, for example, the Forest Preserve, right? All of these entities take a piece of the taxes that you pay. And here's a zoom in on the exemptions that I was referencing. These are the savings from each of the exemptions on this bill. So here's listed out in some detail each of the 6 different homestead exemptions. They're called homestead because they depend on a person residing in the property as his or her principal residence. These aren't for commercial properties. They aren't for rental properties. They're for, homesteads. I don't want to spend too much time going over the details of these. The key thing to point out here is that all of these exemptions are granted by the Cook County assessor. So if you're interested as to whether you are eligible for these exemptions, you should consult with the Cook County assessor's website. They have a very good website. It's relatively easy to apply for these exemptions if you think you're eligible when you read the basic criteria. And I encourage everyone to apply for these exemptions if you think you're missing any of them. You can stack them. You can get the homeowner exemption and the senior citizen exemption, for example. This is more about exemptions. If you miss your exemptions for a year, 2 years, or 3 years, you can apply to the Cook County Assessor's Office, and they can go back up to 4 years implementing the exemptions that you missed. So let's say you missed the homeowners, that you didn't know that you should be getting a homeowner exemption, never heard of it. You can go to the assessor's office and apply for a homeowner exemption, and they'll go back 4 tax years and apply that homeowner's exemption and you'll get refunded the overpayments that you made to the treasurer's office. We'll cut you a check for $700 or $800 for each of those years that you overpaid because you didn't get the homeowner's exemption you were entitled to. They can't go back 20 years. By state law, they can only go back 4. But you should be aware of that. And this is what the adjusted bill looks like that you would get from the Cook County Assessor's Office. Another kind of tax bill is they're called omitted assessments or back taxes. These are issued also by the assessor's office, though collected by the treasurer's office. When the assessor mistakenly missed a parcel. So there are sometimes when, a property has a new structure built on it, and the assessor should have taxed it for a year, but missed it. They didn't realize that there was a new home or building on the property, and so they didn't tax it at all. Then the next year, the satellite picks up the property and they say, oh, there was a building on that parcel. We should have taxed it last year. It was in existence last year. They can go back and issue this back tax or omitted assessment tax and capture the tax money that should have been collected in the previous year. This is really an edge case. I'm not going to spend time on this. Nobody here is getting air pollution bills. There are also railroad bills. So for railroads that run through Cook County, there are railroad parcels that surround the actual tracks. Those get taxed. Don't need to worry about that. An arrearage tax is a very unusual situation where the clerk's office that calculates the tax rates made a mistake in calculating the tax rate that was applicable. And so, for example, the last time we had to issue these arrearage tax bills was in 2020, collectible in 2021, when the clerk made a mistake on 111 pins in Schaumburg, and we had to go back and correct those bills. Okay, so this is a scary red tax bill that the treasurer's office sends out before tax sales. Okay, tax sales occur when a property owner doesn't pay that August 1st bill and up to 13 months later still hasn't paid it. That property then goes to an annual tax sale where we offer the unpaid taxes for sale to the highest bidder. So there are tax lien investors who go around the country buying unpaid taxes, tax liens. And when they pay those taxes up front, we distribute the money to the taxing districts, but then that tax investor is entitled to repayment with interest from the property owner who's tax delinquent. And if that property owner doesn't repay those taxes within a certain period, called the redemption period, for residential property, it's 3 years, then that tax investor can take deed to the property itself. So most of the time when property gets sold, when liens for taxes get sold to these tax investors, about 95% of the time, the property owners scrape the money together to repay the investors with interest. About 5% of the time, the property owner doesn't come up with the money. And in those cases, the tax lien investor can petition the court for a deed to the property. And if they get a deed to the property, then they have the right to evict the resident of the property. So that's a kind of draconian thing that's at the tail end of the whole property tax administration process. And so much of what I've spent my career working on is trying to minimize the number of properties that end up at that very end of the process where the owner of the property stands to lose title to the property to a tax investor, right? So we've worked very hard at the treasurer's office over the years to try to make it less likely that property owners will lose their property to investors for having failed to pay their property taxes on time. One of the things we did last year that we're proud of at the treasurer's office was the interest rate that accrues on unpaid property taxes for many years, and still in the rest of the state outside of Cook County is 18% per annum. It's 1.5% per month that you're late paying your taxes. That interest of 1.5% per month gets added to your bill. We cut that in half to 0.75% per month, or 9% per annum, which is the second lowest delinquency rate in the country. And so we're proud that we stopped such a sort of usurious rate that we are charging taxpayers for their late bills. And 635, I'm going to scroll through here. So here's a redemption bill. This is a bill that I mentioned. The 95% of taxpayers whose taxes are initially sold at the tax sale, but repay the tax lien investor. This is a bill that they get showing how much they have to repay the tax lien investor in order to keep their property. These are obtained from the Cook County Clerk's office. Skip this. Here's an example, just a quick outline of the typical billing cycle. So taxes are collected in arrears in Illinois. So for in December of 2024, we send out first installment tax bills that are due in March, and then at the end of January we mail them. They're due in March, and then the second installments at the end of June. We mail these bills out. The final bills, those yellow second installment bills, they're due in August 1st. 12 months later, we mail out the scary red bill I showed you, saying if you don't pay, you're going to the tax sale, and you stand the possibility then of losing your property to a tax investor. And then the next month, approximately 13 months after that second installment due date, we actually conduct the annual tax sale, where we subject your unpaid taxes to bidding by the tax lien, to an auction, where the tax lien investors can bid on an interest rates that they'll accept repayment for, and take tax liens on your property. With that, I think I'll stop and ask that we go to the Q&A portion of the lesson. Not sure. Should I stop sharing my screen here? And
you might want to share it for just a minute longer, or put it back.
Okay. All right.
There was one request to see the slide about the exemptions again. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing the slide that has that list on it. And then I just wanted to ask you if you would be willing to share the slideshow in general with me.
Sure.
And I can share it with the participants then, so everyone can take a closer look at some of the information that you've shared. I think that will be very helpful. So that will be great. So Justin will share that with me, and I will make sure that everyone who's registered tonight gets a copy of that program. And I'll share that as soon as we have uploaded the video from the presentation also, so that you can hopefully all get to either review anything that you might have missed or want to go over again, or you can always, of course, share with friends and family who might be interested in this topic. So going to the Q&A, someone asks, so if a business closes in the neighborhood, then the homeowners and other businesses will absorb that business's tax rate? Does that kind of happen automatically? The same amount of money must be collected, so it gets shared out?
Yes, that the basic idea is yes, if let's say those taxing districts in an area levy a total of $50 million, the clerk's office is going to tax the property that's in that area so as to yield $50 million of tax collections, right? And so if a big business that was there getting taxed goes out of business and is no longer then getting taxed, then all of the remaining property there has to make up the difference to yield the total of $50 million that the clerk's determined to get, right? And so everybody else's tax rate is going to go up a little bit more to make up the difference for the commercial property that went out of business. And so this has a vicious cycle impact, right? And we see it in the south suburbs especially, where businesses leave, the remaining residential property and businesses get taxed even more. It gets to the point where people can't pay those taxes, so they abandon their homes in many cases, and so nobody's paying the taxes. And so the remaining residents then get taxed even more, right? So it becomes a situation where the few remaining residents are getting taxed in some taxing districts, it's 30-40% tax rate. So 30-40% of market value they're getting taxed, just totally off the charts, and it drives people out of their homes. And so you get a vicious cycle that leads to blight. And Cook County's doing a lot of things to try to prevent that from happening. We have incentives for investment in blighted areas. We have a Cook County land bank that was created in 2013 to try to clear taxes on chronically delinquent property and sell it to developers to put new commercial property back into these areas. But it's quite a struggle, and quite a problem that I don't think anywhere in the country's found a perfect solution to it. But we're doing our best.
Mhm. And I'm sorry, I may have misread this. The person wanted to see the slide with the bill that shows the exemptions.
Okay.
The exemptions list.
So here's maybe this is it. The bill is showing deductions for the homeowner's exemption, the senior citizen exemption, stacking the exemptions, as I mentioned, was possible.
Mhm. Great. And I did, for those of you who are watching the call, I did paste into the chat the link to the Cook County Assessor's Office page on exemptions, which explains what all of them are and how you can apply for them. So just wanted to draw your attention to that as well, in case you missed that in the chat. You can find that there.
This calculator, incidentally, also shows the calculation of the bill that I was talking about. So the 2023 property value, that's the assessor's estimate of market value on this home is $190,000. It's assessed at 10% of that. So 10% of the market value is taxable, get $19,000. The $19,000 of taxable value is multiplied by that equalization factor I mentioned, which is typically hovering right around 3. That gives you what we call the equalized assessed value. That equalized assessed value is then multiplied by the tax rate that's determined by the Cook County clerk. And that gives you your total tax bill for the year before these exemptions then are applied, if any. And then you apply the exemptions, and it'll give you your total tax bill for the year after exemptions. So that's the basic calculation.
So since a property's tax is calculated based on this market value of the property, can you elaborate a little bit on what factors go into the assessment algorithm for a particular property's market value? And do these factors value by year or by any other calculation that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so the primary consideration in determining a property's market value are sales of comparable properties to the extent that there's evidence of sales of comparable properties. So with homes, for example, the assessor's office breaks all of Cook County into neighborhoods, and they look for sales of property in the neighborhood, and they use those sales to estimate the market value of the surrounding homes. And they take many factors into consideration, like, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, the age of the property, the construction materials of the property, the square footage of the property, whether it has a garage. These are factors they consider, and what the mass appraisal system for residential property does is it says, okay, we have a home here that's 2 bedrooms, 2 baths with a garage, built in 1930. Well, we have a sale next door of a property that's 3 bedrooms, 2 baths with a garage, but built in 1970. And what the algorithm tries to do is to estimate the value of the one home that's next to the other home by taking into account the sale value of the one home and accounting for differences in the property characteristics of the home that's being estimated. And so, the assessor's office has assessment professionals and coding professionals always tweaking, trying to get their algorithm better to estimate the value of the homes that haven't been sold based on the sale value of the homes that have been sold. And again, they do that every 3 years for each property. And so for commercial property, it's far more complicated than for residential property. For commercial property, the assessment, the market value is based largely on the income that the property generates. So if you look at a big office building, it's got, let's say, 50 office suites, right? They'll look at how much money each office suite that's leased is generating per square foot based on the value of the leases of that office building. And that gives you an idea of how much income the office building is generating. And that gives you an idea of how much money that office building is worth, because an investor is not interested in the bricks and sticks that we say of the building itself. They're interested in how much revenue they're going to get out of that building, right? They're just interested in dollars and cents. They're not like homeowners who are interested in having a nice place to reside, right? Investors in commercial property are interested in how much money they can get out of the property. So that determines how much they're willing to pay to buy the property, right? And so the assessor uses the income generated by a commercial property to estimate how much an investor would pay for that property to buy it. I'll stop there because I could go on for many hours about the details of that, but that's beyond scope.
A question about how home improvements might factor into this. So in your example, for example, let's say the 1930s home got rehabbed in 2020. It's got the biggest and best of every energy efficient system and insulation, all the bells and whistles. And the 1970s home hasn't been touched since it was built in 1970. Does that affect the valuation, and how does the state become aware of these home improvements, for example?
Interesting question. Yeah, so the assessor has field staff that drive around the county with iPads looking for structural additions or removals from property, but they don't go inside anybody's home and see, okay, they've got granite countertops, so not the old laminate stuff. They've got marble floors, not vinyl crap, right? Mm-hmm. They don't go inside the property, so they don't know whether your dishwasher is a brand new Bosch dishwasher or some old one that doesn't work. They're just going based on the external structure of the properties. So they don't know how high quality or nice the inside of properties is. They do get some indication of that by looking at sale prices in the neighborhood, right? So for example, if you look at Barrington, for example, up a northwest suburb, it's kind of bougie. You've got some relatively older homes that have they have historic value. A lot of them have been nicely rehabbed on the interior, and you'll see that's reflected in the sale price of those homes, right? So it looks like a relatively small home built in 1930, but it's got all nice stuff inside. It's been thoroughly rehabbed, and then it'll sell for $1 million, right? Well, that drives up the values of all the properties around it that haven't been rehabbed, okay? Because the algorithm then says, okay, this property here in this location sold for $1 million. The property is similarly with similar square footage, with similar age, similar number of bedrooms and bathrooms. They're worth $1 million too. That's how the algorithm can get misled. So if you're in a property next to a home that just sold for $1 million, but your property wasn't rehabbed and you don't have the Bosch dishwasher and the granite countertops and the marble floors, okay, you go to the assessor's office and appeal your taxes and you say, hey, look, that property next to mine that you're looking at that sold for $1 million is not actually comparable to my property. Okay. My property is comparable to the one, on the other side of the street here that sold for $400,000. Okay. So compare my property to that one, not to the $1 million. And so if you appeal, the assessor can take a more fine-grained look, and certainly the Board of Review will take an even more zoomed in look, more specific look at your property, and kind of adjust for some of the mistakes that are inherent in a mass appraisal system.
So if someone is going to apply for a property tax appeal, how can they research the property values or taxes within their local community?
The assessor's office provides a tool where you can manually go in and look at your neighborhood and click on properties that because you live in the neighborhood are actually similar to yours. And then you list those properties. They're called comparables. You list comparable properties on your appeal. You say, these ones are actually comparable to mine. I don't know, assessor, what properties you used in your algorithm, but here are the ones I'm telling you are actually comparable to my home, and I should be compared to them. And you can see on the assessor's website what the estimates of market value were for those other homes in your area. And so you, frankly, pick the ones that are lower rather than the ones that are higher. And you say, my property is more comparable to those lower valued homes than to those higher valued homes that are also in the neighborhood. And so you assert a sort of manual control over which properties you want the assessor to look at and deem to be comparable to your own. But there's a tool available through the assessor's office.
Great. Someone else wants to know why there's a different outcome if they appeal their tax assessment through the assessor's office himself versus going through a lawyer who solicits property tax cases. They say it doesn't seem to make sense that I can't effectively appeal my assessment on my own. Do you have any comment or suggestions about that?
So if you're talking about a residential property tax appeal, there's an interesting statistic indicating that property owners who do their own appeals do a little better than when a property tax appeal attorney files the appeal for them. So I actually worked at the assessor's office. I work at the treasurer's office. I also worked at the assessor's office for 2 years, and I spent 2 years in private practice appealing property taxes, mostly for big commercial properties, not residential properties. But if you get a mailing from a property tax firm to your home saying we'll appeal your property taxes, I personally take that with a grain of salt and ask myself, well, can I just try this on my own? And it may be that you're likely statistically to do as well or better on your own appeal, just as an ordinary homeowner with no special knowledge, than an attorney's than a law firm that does this in high volume, presumably because you're paying much closer attention to your own situation than a law firm that's appealing on thousands of these properties, right? So I'd encourage you to take a shot and do it on your own. Statistically speaking, you'll do as well or better than you would have done had you used an attorney to appeal on your house. For commercial properties, obviously, it's a different ball game. It's too complicated for the ordinary building owner to do. They hire these law firms to do it. Right? But for residential property, I'd encourage you, frankly, to appeal on your own to the assessor and to the Board of Review.
Okay. Who should citizens contact if they want to, say, for example, urge changes in the property tax distribution? For example, suggest that commercial properties should pay a higher share than they currently do, increase the pollution tax, something like that. Is there a proper way to go about registering your opinion on how property taxes are assessed or divided?
So there's two angles of attack here. One is to look at the taxing districts that tax your property and contact the leadership of those taxing districts and say, essentially, you need to reduce your budget. Your levy is too high. I want your levy to be lower so that my property is taxed less, right? That's one thing to do. And I'd encourage you to do that. There's a lot of, I am in government. I can tell you there is quite a bit of waste in government. One of the things that Illinois in particular is criticized for is having so many different units of local government. We have many more units of local government than other states typically do. And the more little units of government you have, the library district, the fire protection district, the mosquito abatement district, the municipality itself, all of these units of government have staffs. They're paying for people to sit at computers and do things. And there's been a lot of research, public policy research, indicating there'd be quite a bit of savings if you consolidated those units of government. So there wouldn't be so much overhead. So you might think about that and petition your taxing districts to reduce their expenses or lower their levy anyway, so that they're asking for less tax money. The other way of going at this, and this is to address the amount of we call it the level of assessment. So I spoke of the residential property being assessed at 10% of the property's market value, commercial property being assessed at 25% of the market value. We say is that a 10% level of assessment and a 25% level of assessment. In all of the rest of the state of Illinois, there's no difference in the level of assessment between commercial and residential property. It's all assessed at 1/3 of market value. So there's a very level playing field between residential and commercial property. They're just taxed at the same level. In Cook County, not at the level of state law, but at the level of local Cook County ordinance. So the Cook County Board of Commissioners, the legislative body of Cook County, has passed an ordinance specifying these different levels of assessment for the different classifications of property. So if you want commercial property to be taxed higher, you would ask the Cook County Board of Commissioners by ordinance, in Cook County ordinance, to raise it from 25% to say 30%, 35%, right? and residential to 5%, let's say. Now, personally, I think that's the wrong direction to go for the health of the local economy. I'm progressive in my politics, and even so, I think this bifurcation of levels of assessment between commercial getting taxed at a higher level of assessment than residential drives business out of not necessarily downtown, but the suburbs. It drives them to Indiana. It drives them to Lake County and DuPage County, where they're taxed at the same level as residential property. And what you'll find is you're harming yourselves as residents and your homes and the amount of tax you're seeing by driving commercial property out of the area. You'd be better off everybody being commercial and residential being assessed at the same level of assessment, say a third of the market value of the property, but you'd have more commercial property in the area around your home, and so your tax burden would be less. So your net tax bill would actually be lower if you had more commercial property around you, but taxed at the same level of assessment as residential property. That's what you find in other counties in the state. But you know, the Cook County Board of Commissioners, being elected politicians, beholden to constituents, now that they've said it at, residential properties only assessed at 10% of market value, they're going to be very reluctant to say, oh, we're going to take that away and put you back at the same level as commercial, right? Once this benefit is put forward, it's very hard to take it away. But in fact, I think it's distorting the tax base and driving commercial property out of the area that would otherwise be in the area, offsetting the tax burden on residential property. But that's my 2 cents.
Okay. How is the state equalizer determined, and does it change?
Yeah, the state equalizer, I mean, there's a multi-week seminars on how the equalizer is determined by the Illinois Department of Revenue. But the basic idea is they look at sales of actual sales of property all across the state, looking back 3 years. So for every year that there's a new equalizer, they look back over the previous 3 years. And what they do is they look at, for each county, they look at how close the assessor's estimates of market value are to the actual sales of property over a 3-year span in that county. And they adjust it so that basically to true it up, so that the estimates of market value are trued up to the actual sales of property over a 3-year stretch. So in most of the other counties in Illinois, this equalizer, the 3.0163 that we're looking at here, is 1. It hovers around 1. Basically, they're nailing it. Okay. In Cook County, because of the ordinance that we've got, where residential is assessed at just 10% of property value and commercial is at 20%, 25%, it distorts things to the point where the assessments have to be multiplied by 3 to get it trued up to where this analysis of sales ratio studies are called, deems that it should be. So you can look at this as a kind of report card on the assessment accuracy in a county. 1 is good, 3 is not so good. We've had it down in the 2.6, 2.7 in some prior years. We've never gotten anywhere near 1.
Someone who purchased a condo in June of 2024 and is 66 years old wants to know if they can apply for senior and homeowner exemptions for 2024 yet.
Okay, so 2024, we're billing, yes, you should apply for 2024 now, I believe. And then you want to get it onto the bill, this locked and loaded so that it's applied to your second installment 2024 tax bill that'll be due in August of 2025. So it'll show up on the yellow bill that's due in August of 2025. So yeah, I would apply to the assessor. I would apply to the assessor's office now, because the sooner you get it in, the less likely you're going to have to deal with that certificate of error situation where they have to go back a year and apply it retroactively, and then you have to wait for a refund. So yeah, I'd apply to the assessor now.
Great. Does the state or the county limit the maximum percentage increase of a market revaluation or of the tax bill compared to a previous year?
No, it does not. And that's one of the policy matters that is much discussed, whether there should be a limit put on how much a bill can increase year over year. You know, you might not do it in terms of the tax bill itself. You might do it in terms of how much of an increase in assessed value there is year over year. But yeah, that's been much discussed. There is no such limit right now. There are limits placed on taxing districts. Some taxing districts are subject to limits on how much they can increase a levy year over year. So typically it's 5% or less that they're permitted to increase their levy year over year, though they can vote to basically absolve themselves of that limit and go above it anyway. But there is a state law attempt to cap increases in the levies that these taxing districts issue every year.
So for the reassessment year of 2022, what years can be true, or what years can be used? Is it true only the 3 years prior? So only 2019 through 2021 sales can be used for the assessment in 2022?
So were we talking about an assessment appeal or how the assessor's office looks at it when they're determining the 2022 assessment?
I believe so, yeah. Is that what are they using the 2019 through 2021 sales for their calculation of the 2022, their assessment in 2022?
Yes, and the more recent sales get weighted more heavily by the algorithm.
Okay. Let's see. The person is responding. It says, if my understanding that only the sales of 3 years prior can or should be used to determine the market value is correct, the appeal of a 2024 property tax of their property, the sales comparable properties should only be those that were sold 3 years prior to 2022 as well, as the market value of their property is rolled over from 2022 to 2024. So if their property was assessed in 2022, or is that still the assessment that they're basing their appeal
on? Well, so whatever your most recent reassessed value is. So let's say it was reassessed in 2024. You would look, that should be a change over 2021. So your estimate of market value on your property should be the same for 2021, 2022, and 2023. And then 2024, you'll get a new estimate of market value out of the assessor. And you'll look back over those prior 3 years in your neighborhood for sales of property in your neighborhood, indicating that your property is not worth as much as the assessors got it for in 2024. I'm not sure I totally understand the question.
Yeah. But it should be based on whatever your last assessment was from the assessor's office.
Yeah, look at for your most recent assessment from the assessor's office, that estimate of market value. You want to look for recent sales in your area as recent as possible, you know, indicating that your property is worth less than the assessor's estimated to be. I mean, think what we like to say is, you people have some general idea of what they would put their property on the market for if they were going to sell today, right? Well, look at the assessor's estimate of market value. So on this property we're looking at, it's $190,000 estimate market value. The homeowner ought to ask, okay, well, if I put my property on the market, do I think I would get $190,000 for it? Do I think I would get a lot more than that? If I think I could get a lot more than 190, then maybe this tax bill is fair and I'm not going to appeal it, right? If they think I could only get $120,000 for this property, okay, then they think, okay, this 190 is an overestimate of my market value. I'm going to appeal it. And then you got to come up with a basis for why you think you could only sell your property for 120 rather than 190.
Mhm. All right, final question, because I know we've gone a little over here. What is the incentive for vacant commercial properties to remain vacant?
What is the incentive for so this is a debated issue. Now, I don't know if you mean entirely vacant or um, you know, they're operating. They've got an occupancy license, and they're in most cases businesses start leasing their property up as soon as they possibly can. Um, there's been suggestion that some commercial property owners are deliberately keeping their property partially vacant or not soliciting lessees, tenants, um, as vigorously as they should, because the assessor does give breaks based on vacancy, 1 year at a time to commercial property owners. So let's say you're an office building, which if it were fully leased would bring in $1 million a year of lease of rent money. But you've only got it 50% leased, so you're actually only bringing in $500,000 of rent money that year. You can appeal to the assessor and say, hey, I've tried my best to lease my office building up to 100%, but I couldn't get tenants at market rate. I only got half leased up at market rate, so I only got $500,000 of rent money. The assessor's office will give you a break on your assessment 1 year at a time, and they're not supposed to do it more than once in a row, 1 year in a row, um, by their own rules, uh, uh, because you didn't get all the money out of your building that it potentially could have gotten. There's been discussion that some commercial property owners were deliberately keeping their property only 50% leased, because they would get then a break on their tax bill. Personally, I think that's not a very common practice, because at least the buildings I represented, they would come out way ahead, if they leased their property up 100% and paid the higher tax bill than if they leased their property up only 50% and got a relatively minor reduction in their tax bill. So the incentives, in my view, having practiced in the area, I didn't see it very much at all, where a commercial property owner was deliberately maintaining a relatively high level of vacancy in a property just so as to hope that the assessor or the board of review would give them a break on their tax bill that year, because you have to do it every year. And you have to prove that you're trying to lease the property. You have to provide ads and so forth, demonstrating that you're trying to lease your property at market rent rates. So my view is that that's something of an urban myth, and it doesn't happen very much.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really appreciate all of your knowledge and your sharing it with us. I will look forward to getting the copy of the slides from you so that we can share those with our participants. Yes, everyone, as I said in the chat, you have the link there to the Cook County Assessor's Office, which has many more explanations on how to calculate your home's assessment and the exemptions you can apply for. You can always call their office also. It's at the bottom of the page. If you scroll down on that link there, you can find their phone number and their email address if you have other questions that are too confusing to figure out from the webpage. So we encourage you to do that. So thank you again very much for being here tonight. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thanks
Have a
for having
wonderful
me.
evening, everyone. Hope to see you next month.